Welcome to this session. We're going to be talking about intelligent decision making with Workflow Data Fabric. So Workflow Data Fabric is one of our newer capabilities that you're going to be hearing a lot about over the next couple of years. I know it's talked a little bit about, Chris Betty talked about it this morning in the keynote. And so we're going to go into it and dive into it. This is more of a high-level vision type, conversation around, hey, where are we going with it? What are the capabilities? How you should be looking at it? What it's going to do from your business perspective? And a little bit less on the technical side in this particular one. But if you have follow-up questions, we'll be glad to get with you and talk about the technical follow-up and everything that goes with that. Real quick, I have my face really big on the screen. My name is Chris Geer. I run our solution consulting team for what we call creator workflows. And so it is all of our app dev and building capabilities on the platform. And so my team covers all of our US public sector customers across the board. And we'll just dive into it. All right, Workflow Data Fabric. There's some slides you're going to have seen before. You saw this morning, right? ServiceNow is positioning ourselves to be the AI platform for government transformation. And really, we're trying to look at all of the outcomes, and obviously this is just a smattering of them. It's about, hey, how do we use AI on top of the platform for you to better serve your employees and to serve your customers, constituents, whatever term you might use in that, whether it be internal to the government, external to the government. And so we're really looking at, hey, how can the platform be used, augmented with AI, to make this easier for you to solve for? And when we look at it, and we talk about AI, and we look at agents, we look at applications, and we look at automations, the one thing that all of them need to have access to be effective is data. And that's a conversation we've been having with y'all for years. This is not new. It's all about, hey, I want to solve this problem, whether it be a business problem or a mission problem or whatever else it might be. The first thing we talk about is, okay, hey, what does that look like? What's the data that you need to do that? And can we get access to that data so that we can help you do that, to eliminate as many swivel chairs as possible? Sometimes the answer's been yes, sometimes the answer's been no. But our continued goal, and what we've seen over the years, is we've been expanding that ability for you to reach out and get access to more and more of your data. It started with iHub, it went into RPA, into Doc Intelligence, and now when we start talking about Workflow Data Fabric, we're expanding that again to give you access to even more data. And you can see some of the metrics on here, like locked in hundreds of data silos. I would ask for a show of hands, but I'm pretty sure all of you would raise your hands. Hey, you've got lots of data silos out there. And a lot of them are probably things like Excel, right? Or Access databases or whatever else it might be. There's informal data silos that you have out there that you're looking to solve for. So how do we address that? Because again, for this strategy to be effective, you got to get access to that data. And again, you guys saw this slide this morning again, but I think it's important to repeat. Our strategy really revolves around getting access to your data and then allowing you to continue to build workflows and augment those workflows with AI agents as we go down that path. Continue to build those workflows and applications and then augment them with the AI agents to help automate, to help do more, especially as we start talking about agentic AI. I think if you have a bingo card, you can check that word off. We've tackled that one. And so when we look at agentic AI, how do you have all of these agents that you might build work together and collaborate and be orchestrated across your enterprise with that data to help you get your job done faster? And so you're going to be seeing a lot of this. But let's kind of dive into some of the specifics here, right? The first step is, how do you connect to your data, right? Whether that data be inside of ServiceNow, whether it be in an enterprise application, or maybe it's data, external data. It's out in the cloud somewhere in AWS or Azure, or pick your cloud of choice, Google Cloud. The second thing is, how do you understand your data? How do you tell the system what your data means? What does that look like? How do you help your users understand what all of your data means? And the third piece is, how do you take action on that, right? We talk a lot about this. We've talked a lot about this today. Historically over time, workflows, applications, providing good experiences with workspaces to be able to see the data. In the future, it's all about AI agents. How do we continue to program in efficiency and automation into the system in an autonomous way? Another way to look at this is connecting, and we'll talk about this, connecting with spokes, to systems that have APIs, connecting to streaming data for high-speed data. And then the new thing that we'll be talking about is zero copy. How do you get access to data out in your data lakes without having to move all of that data into your ServiceNow instance? Because that's a common thing as well. Hey, I've got all this data living somewhere. I don't want to make a copy of it and have to synchronize it and worry about it getting out of sync. How do I get access to that data in its current state, in its current system, so that I can still act upon it? In the middle, understand, right? How do we look at that data? Two of the ones I want to touch on beyond governance. Governance is obviously important when we talk about this, but process mining. There's another session going on right now talking about process mining. Process mining is actually a core component of Workflow Data Fabric to get that started so that as you get access to more and more data, we're also giving you the tools to analyze that data and see the trends and see what's going on with it. Hey, I've got incident data. Let me go run process mining on it and understand, hey, for this particular ticket type, it gets stuck, and it's stuck for 30 days on average. Why is that? Oh, it's because it's in Bob's email, and Bob never checks his email. Okay, fine. But you can start to analyze and look to see, hey, where are the bottlenecks, and to help you so you don't have to do that manually. The other one is LLMs, right? LLMs, again, probably on your bingo card. It's that's the topic of the day with generative AI. Is how do you involve LLMs into your decision-making process and use it to help you analyze your data in better ways? And that all comes together into ACT. Again, with AI agents, with our packaged AI workflows or our packaged out-of-the-box systems, and then custom stuff that you're able to build, right? ServiceNow is not just a platform that comes with out-of-the-box capabilities. We have a lot of really, really good out-of-the-box capabilities, but we're a low-code platform at heart. We want you to use all of our out-of-the-box stuff, but then also use us to build all the stuff that's unique to you, especially the folks in this room. You got a lot of unique stuff, right? There's no out-of-the-box products that are going to solve a lot of your challenges. You're going to have to build them somewhere, and we want to give you the tools that you choose ServiceNow to build that capability on top of. All right, so we're going to try to make this a little bit more real. One of the scenarios we kind of talked about in that first slide was emergency management. And I'm just using this as an example, to talk about the complexity of data to kind of make this a little bit more real. If anyone here is involved in emergency management, please give me grace. I'm oversimplifying this. I understand that. But I think that it's a good example. When we look at emergencies, we look at natural disasters. They can happen anywhere, right? We can't predict that. We don't know where it's going to happen. It's going to happen anywhere. And when one happens, right, let's take, hey, there's a tornado in the south there. We need to be able to respond to that. As the government or as a state agency, they need to be able to respond to that emergency, get the right resources in place. There's a lot of data that they need to be able to make those decisions and make the right decisions to have that response be effective and to help the people out that are involved, right? So there's an impacted population. There's a group of people that were impacted by that disaster or that emergency, whatever else it might be. We have to figure out who that is, and a lot of times that's it. It's figuring out who is that population to begin with, who was impacted. And then we start with our emergency response team. Again, whether that's a federal response team or that's a state and local or a volunteer organization, how do we use our resources and our organization to go solve and serve that impacted community? Well, first thing might be, how do I get my people from point A to point B? Easy thing. Maybe I fly them in, right? We get a bunch of airline tickets, we fly a bunch of people in. Well, okay, what if the airports were impacted? Do I have to fly into a different airport? Or do I have to drive in? Do I have to take the train in? Understanding all of the, just getting people from point A to point B can actually be really, really complicated depending on what that disaster is and how it's impacted the local vicinity. But beyond that, right? Hey, emergency response. How do I coordinate with local emergency response? Maybe I got to bring an emergency response from elsewhere. I've got to bring people in to surge support to be able to help with that emergency. What do I do about supplies? Can my folks come in with a checkbook and buy supplies locally, go down to the Walmart and buy supplies? Maybe. Or maybe not, because maybe that Walmart or whatever store has been destroyed and I've got to ship them in. I've got to go source them from warehouses. Where are those warehouses? Who owns them? How do I have a contract with them? How do I get access to it, right? There's a lot of decisions that go into that. Hey, how do I feed and house and staff my people that I'm flying into those areas? And again, what about all of the other people involved with this? Volunteer organizations, the press, folks showing up, volunteering to help, the Red Cross, whatever else it might be. There's lots of moving parts that are part of this large problem. And so when you look at that, and again, this is just an example, but you can go picture any use case and any complex use case in your environment, And it probably looks like this, right? I've got all these decisions that I need to make, and the data that I need to make those decisions lives in all sorts of different systems across my enterprise. It might be inside of ServiceNow, which is great. It might be in your ERP system. It might be in your CRM system. It might be in your HR system. It might be in the 157 Excel files, right? It might be anywhere in your organization. So how do you make sense of that and bring it together so that you can build workflows and you can build applications and that you can build eventually these agentic AI systems that are able to help automate and build on top of this? The data is the first and the biggest thing that we have to get together, regardless if you're going to agentic AI or you're just trying to automate your workflows. And so that's where ServiceNow comes in. And our vision for this, and this is where Workflow Data Fabric comes in, is we're trying to invest in Workflow Data Fabric. Think of it as a data layer inside of the ServiceNow platform that allows you to take all of those various data sources that are out there and abstract those sources and the data away from those sources so that your users and your builders inside of ServiceNow don't necessarily care where the data is coming from, that we're able to then, but we're able to make it easy for you to get the data into the system so that you can start using it. All right, so I just threw a lot at you, but I want to again take a couple specific examples from my scenario. So we look at data sources, and connection methods. The first one, airline reservations, right? We talked about that. That might be the first thing in this scenario that we look at. Well, great. Most airlines probably have an API, like Sabre or whatever the API choice is. There's probably a relatively straightforward way to get access to that data. And nothing changes. You connect to that the same way you connect to that today. We have iHub spokes. You could build, if there's an out-of-the-box spoke, great. If not, you can use our spoke generator or our generative AI spoke generator to build a spoke for that API to help you get access to that data to be able to pull that in. Now, in that case, you're making a call, you're doing a search, you're pulling the data in, you're caching it, you're making some decisions on it, right? And that's what we've done for a long time. But you're able to do that. The second one might be, hey, who's impacted? Maybe there's a database? Probably not, right? A lot of that is probably people walking around collecting information with a clipboard or an Excel file on a laptop or a tablet. You're able to pull that data in, then you got to collate and bring that data together and then bring it into the system in a different way. Historically, right, we've probably done that with analysts. They've gone out in the field, they've collected the data, it comes back, they hands over to an analyst, and they're manually typing that data into a database somewhere. In our world, we would suggest that we look at that with maybe an RPA bot, right? We use our RPA solution. It goes through that Excel file, it pulls the data out, and it puts it into a table inside of ServiceNow. Or if you've got paper-based stuff on a standard form, we use our document intelligence capability that's part of Workflow Data Fabric to read that data off the form directly into a table and then take action on it. So again, even in those scenarios, we have ways to help automate that process and eliminate some hours from your work. Third one, I call this situational data updates. This might be weather updates. This might be scanning a Twitter feed for what's going on in the community. This might be, maybe the Army or the military is involved and you're getting situational updates from them, in real time from the National Guard, for example. Some sort of high-speed streaming data that you need to process and cherry pick out the information that's important to you. We actually have an integration with Kafka. We call it Stream Connect. Again, bundled in, it's all part of this Workflow Data Fabric capability that allows you to plug into these streaming data sources and start to cherry pick out the data that's important to you. And then the last one, the new one, by the way, this last one is the one that they talked about in the keynote this morning, coming in, I think it was June. This zero copy data capability. Everything else we've talked about exists today. This last one is the new thing. And this is really neat. This is the ability to go out and connect to a data lake, whether it be a Snowflake or a Databricks or a Google, or I think there's an Oracle one, and then more coming in the future, around being able to connect into that data lake. And in this case, I'm using an example, hey, information on all previous disasters and impacted people. I want to go, hey, have people that are impacted by this one been impacted before? What's their history? What are their claims have been before? Now, in the past, you would have had to have done one of those other ones where I call into the data lake, I copy the data into ServiceNow, and I start analyzing it and use it part of my workflows. Now I don't have to do that. With zero copy, I'm able to actually connect up to my data lake, and as part of my flows, I'm able to then query that data lake to enrich my data model with data from that data lake. That's transitory. It's part of my workflow, but I'm not making copies of that data into the ServiceNow database. And I can probably see, you can imagine the value that that can provide, especially when you're talking about terabytes or larger sets of data that you don't want to have to copy into the ServiceNow database to be able to use as part of your workflow. And so that is a future, that is one of our capabilities that is coming down the road a little bit. Again, this morning, Chris Betty mentioned June, I believe was the date that he mentioned for that. But that's a really cool capability that gives us more options. And so what you can see we're doing here is we're trying to take all of the ways that you have data, where all the places you have data today, and provide you ways to access that data and use it within a ServiceNow workflow or application. Again, ServiceNow kind of starts to become that system of action that you're able to build these workflows and these applications and these agentic AI interactions on top of, regardless of where the data might be the system of record of where that data might live today. All right, so with that, one of the additional really neat features that's coming with zero copy and coming as part of Workflow Data Fabric later this year is this data mapper capability. And this is the one that really gets me excited. So I'm a software developer by trade. I spent 20 plus years of my career on the custom software and engineering and operations side of the house. And building a good data model and getting access to that data in an intelligent way, that's always the thing you got to get right and really think about it from that perspective. And again, with ServiceNow, to build an application with a data model, I can always model tables in the system. That's straightforward. But it's getting the data into those tables that's been the challenge, especially with the large volumes of data that you might have in a data warehouse. Now, I can build a data model that includes fields from tables inside of ServiceNow, but also includes fields that live external to the system. And so a data model that has my master data model with some data local and some data remote. And that's what you're seeing on this screen here, where you're able to connect up. In this case, it's using Snowflake. And in the bottom left, you see that top left, you see some data that's coming from ServiceNow. And the bottom left, you see something from, it's got Workday, Qualtrics, Snowflake, kind of feeding in external data into this data model. For example, let's pick a shipping request, right? We're going to talk about a shipping request. Maybe I use ServiceNow to manage my shipping requests for assets. Great, new laptops going to new users. But I still got to send that data to UPS or FedEx or pick your shipping partner of choice, and the data might live out there. Well, if I've got or it's part of your ERP system through your transportation management solution or whatever else it might be. If you've got that data also co-located inside of like a data lake, because you're using it for reporting and everything else, a lot of you have probably spent a lot of money over the years pulling data into a data lake, and you've already done a lot of that work about pulling that data together. Now, I can use ServiceNow and the zero copy connector to be able to reach into that data lake and augment my ServiceNow data model with data from my data lake. So now that I've got my shipping information, but I've also got all my tracking information and my delivery information all tied together, that doesn't live inside of ServiceNow, but I can use it as part of my workflow and my decision-making process. Does that make sense at a high level? All right. So with that, what I want to do is I'm actually going to, we're going to play a video real quick that shows some of this, and then we'll come back and wrap up.
Businesses are storing more data than ever before, but it's often trapped and siloed across hundreds of different systems. Workflow Data Fabric connects any system or data source directly into the ServiceNow platform, powering all your workflows and AI with real-time data. Let's see how. What you're seeing is Workflow Data Fabric in action for a large telecommunications company. Enterprises of this size have petabytes of data. To make smart decisions, they need to connect, understand, and act on this data, no matter where it resides. That's where Data Fabric comes in. Here, you can see Data Fabric connecting both structured and unstructured data in Snowflake, Databricks, and even tools like Cisco and hyperscalers like AWS. New with Workflow Data Fabric are zero-copy data partnerships with leading data clouds like Databricks and Snowflake keeping your critical data where it resides without needing to copy it into ServiceNow. With just a few clicks, this telco company can set up a new zero-copy connection to their data lake, connecting terabytes of real-time network inventory data directly to ServiceNow. And Data Fabric's automated record and field-level mapping takes this network inventory data and harmonizes it into a single data model that can be actioned by any workflow in ServiceNow. After clicking Save, this data is now part of the ServiceNow data model, while the physical data remains external. Data Fabric zero-copy connections act like any other data in ServiceNow and can be used to build AI workflows or power skills for AI agents, all while keeping data where it resides. Let's see how this works in action. Here is an AI-powered workflow to monitor network operations. When a critical network outage is detected, the workflow actions a series of tasks to understand the outage and assign a local field service technician. Before Data Fabric, only top-level network data was stored in ServiceNow. Today, Data Fabric brings real-time data from any system directly into this workflow. When a network disruption causes an outage, the workflow has access to a massive dataset of real-time IoT device details, tower locations, and relevant articles, triggering a deeper analysis, all without leaving ServiceNow. This data powers not just workflows, but also more accurate and actionable AI. Here, during an outage, an AI agent uses the same Data Fabric connections and workflows to diagnose the issue, find the right technician, and complete a first-time fix. The repair is automatically documented and reflected in all Data Fabric connections. No need to update, move data, or keep multiple systems in sync. Workflow Data Fabric unifies data across your enterprise, powering all your workflows and AI agents with real-time data from any source, inside or outside ServiceNow, all on the single AI platform for business transformation.
All right, so hopefully that's kind of a little bit of an example of what we're talking about. But what I want to kind of close with and really kind of talk about is this is all great technology. And it's going to let us do a lot of really cool things. But more importantly, what it's going to let us do is it's going to let us think about how we solve problems differently tomorrow than we have in the past. There's going to be a whole lot, we're going to be able to really look at the solution set in a very different way than we have historically. Instead of looking at, okay, great, what do I have, where is this data located? Maybe this data is in an Oracle database. I'm going to use some Oracle solution to build that because that's where the core data lives. Or I'm going to use, again, the Salesforce or the Microsoft or whatever else it might be based on data locality, which is a very common way of looking at how systems have been built up into this day. I work with a lot of customers and they have a really good process around a new request comes in for a requirement. First thing they do is look at where does that core data live, and then that dictates where they build the solution. Great. And that's not a bad strategy. But in the future, it's going to let us really rethink that process and to be able to think about what is the best way to get that work done, and how do and looking at how do I get access to that data? Especially if the data is coming from a data lake with zero-copy connectors, it gives you a lot more flexibility in the choice of the platform you use to fulfill that requirement than you've had in the past. And you're able to consolidate and co-locate more processes. Obviously, we want you to do that on ServiceNow, right? And that's why we're investing in a lot of these capabilities. Because from our vision and from what we've seen in working with customers, it's not about building a workflow or an agent or an application. That's great. We want you to do that. We want that to be a big part of what you do. Where it gets really interesting is when you build that 10th workflow and that 50th application and that 100th agent. Because now that you've got all of that process happening on the ServiceNow platform, now stuff like process mining becomes a whole lot more interesting. Now I'm able to run process mining across all of those processes and to start to see interconnectivity and bottlenecks between those processes and how they overlap. And hey, maybe these processes are all using the same data. Why are they all using the same data? We don't know, right? But, and so it gives you, as you start to co-locate a lot of those processes onto a single system, you now suddenly have access to a whole lot more information about how they interact interact and how they work together, which allows you to make better decisions about what to keep, what to retire, how to build new stuff, how to augment that in the future. And so that's really, I think, the power of this and why we're really looking and positioning ServiceNow as that system of action that allows you to run your enterprise or run your government agency and to get as much value out of that, especially in the agentic AI world, right? Because the more stuff you have co-located and the more stuff you have access to data, the more interoperable all those agents and bots can be. Doesn't mean you can't reach out. We've got lots of ways for you to reach out and interact with other systems. You can go call another LLM, or you can go call whatever else that might be. But the more you're able to build on top of the single platform and that single data model, the more value you can get out of a lot of these tools, especially in that cross-process, those cross-process process mining capabilities as an example. So with that, I'm actually going to wrap up a couple minutes early so we have some time for questions. So she's got a mic. If you want to raise your hand, that way we can get it. Get one up here.
Hi. So 3 quick things. First, when is this releasing?
So Workflow Data Fabric, fundamentally, if we look at it, you've got a history of the platform. Workflow Data Fabric is an evolution of Automation Engine. And so a lot of the capabilities, iHub, the iHub, the RPA, the Doc Intel, are all parts of Stream Connector, all parts of Automation Engine today. So from a branding and a platform perspective, that stuff is all now Workflow Data Fabric. Okay. And so those components already exist and they continue to exist. The new zero-copy connectors and some of that stuff is what Chris mentioned is coming in the June timeframe.
Okay, great. Is this two-way? Could I update data in the system of truth with these connectors or no?
So
is it read-only?
So with this, the zero-copy connectors, to my understanding, and again, we're still learning more about it since it's still future release, and is that it's a read. However, okay. Since we do have iHub spokes and we have RPA and everything else, the way that I would typically, and again, this is just Chris's philosophy, right? When you look at it. Read access to lots of massive data is great, but updates to that data you probably want to do not in the data, maybe you do want to do it in the data warehouse, but a lot of times you want to do that through the system of record that populated that data warehouse anyways, because it's a transaction update or it's PO or something along those lines. And so you could do that as part of a process through one of the spokes or through an RPA bot.
Yeah. All right. Last one. So I see it being used in a workflow, right? Is this available, say, through UI Builder and like a data resource? Could I implement this in a workspace?
So, great question. Under the covers, this is building a data model. So everything you're doing with that data model builder, it looks like a table inside of ServiceNow.
Amazing. Okay, all right.
Any other questions?
So going back to the screen where we saw the data model being built and the relationships, just curious to know if it's kind of a start from scratch, you figure out what the UIDs are and the linkages, or does it predefine any of those relationships based on the source? So,
and again, this is still all new stuff that's coming out, so I didn't have my safe harbor slide in here, right? So we're talking a little bit about futures here, right, at this point. Is my understanding, much like we have with our data map, some of the enhancements with Data Mapper today, where it's going to use our inherent knowledge of the data source to make some educated guesses. It may or may not be perfect, but my understanding is that it's going to do some level of automated mapping when it can. I don't know. I don't know the details at that level. So, but I think the goal is for it to be easy to use. And the good news is once you do it once, again, since it's now accessible inside of ServiceNow, all of your developers, all of your process analysts, everyone else never has to know how that's done. They don't need to know how the sausage is made. They just need to know the data is available to them, and then they can use it in their applications, workflow, and AI agents.
From a practical standpoint, the more connections that I see, the more nervous that I get if I am an operations person, right? Mm-hmm. So if, in the case of the zero-time connector to a data lake, if that puppy drops, it's just like you're dead in the water. What kind of resiliency is being built around that, that particular, possible issue that can bring essentially your your whole application to a halt?
Sure. No, I think that's a good question because we got to look at it from, hey, if you're using in a lot of ways, it's not that different than any of the other connections, right? If the connection has issues, there's a challenge with that. In this case, it probably is a little bit more interesting because you might be using it in a real-time fashion or something along those lines. And I don't have the specifics about, hey, what is, specifically around what a failover might look like or whatever. Obviously, we have the redundancy in our platform and how everything works together. One of the things that I have seen them talk about is when you start to define this and look at the data lake is how do you implement security on top of that so that, hey, in the data lake, I've got all this data, but I still need to have some sort of control over around which users can access which data from the data lake. So they're looking at all of that. I don't have all the details about how it's implemented yet, but I know that all of that is part of it. And as that starts to roll out over the next few months, we'll be able to share more. Yes, 100%.
Sources you're reaching out to, the more likely it is. So, from an implementation standpoint, I would say maybe this data that is in 3 or 4 different places, we're all going to drop it into that data lake. That way, I don't have to have as many connections.
Well, and that's exactly the point of doing this. Is today, if I'm pulling data from my SAP system and my Oracle system and my whatever else, I'm doing point-to-point connections between ServiceNow and all of those source systems. In the future, a lot of organizations, I know a lot of government agencies have spent millions of dollars consolidating data into data lakes and doing a lot of that point-to-point work. And so this eliminates if you've got a data lake that has that data in it, this allows you to have that one connection to be able to get that data and not have to do all the point-to-points. Now, you might need to reach back out through a point-to-point to do an update or something along those lines, but from a read, you're right, that will help in that scenario. Mm-hmm. Any other question up here?
So I have a data lake in AWS, for example.
Mm-hmm.
My AWS has a rate limit for connections to keep me from getting a denial of service attack.
Okay.
I also have a download cost to it.
Sure.
How is that all going to play into an AI bot trying to gather as much data as possible out of this data lake?
Yeah, and so I think one of the questions would be, and I don't have the answer to this one, but one of the questions would be, hey, when I make this zero copy connector connection, is there a way for me to put guardrails around data transfer rates or whatever else? I don't know yet. But that's something we can follow. If you give me information, I can follow. As we start to get that information, we can get that to you. But when when you look at it beyond that, ignoring even that for a second, I still think there is a architectural design decision that you have to make. And this goes back to resiliency as well. It comes down to what is the best approach for you. Because a lot of times, and there's not a right or a wrong answer here. Just because we have a zero copy connector to a data lake may or may not be the right answer for you. It still might make sense for you to connect to that and pull down data once a night. Maybe you don't need real-time access to that data. You just need it cached every 24 hours or whatever else it might be. So you need to look at that from your application, your performance metrics, and what your requirements are, and still make that design decision about, hey, with this, does it make sense for me to pull the data down into ServiceNow, cache it for whatever else, and use it locally because it doesn't change that often, and that way I avoid my problem, is there another way that I need to deal with what that data is? So I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to that. It's looking at each individual problem and how you would address it based on your requirements and what the technology does or doesn't allow you to do to mitigate those. All right, I think we got about another minute. Any last questions?
I guess following up on that, right? So it's always zero copy connector. Is there an option to maybe cache like the most recently pulled data, say over the course of the day?
My understanding is there is going to, from what I've seen, again, I'm caveating this because it's not a final product yet, right? Yes, there's going to be some level of caching of some sort from what I've seen. But again, I want to defer until we see exactly what comes out, what's in GA, what's a follow-on feature. Since it still is futures, there's a little, I don't want to say with certainty exactly how that's going to work yet.
It's a really cool technology.
It is.
I can think of a lot of use cases immediately. So.
Yeah, and I think, and again, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve every problem that's out there, but it's going to give you another option that you didn't previously have. And I think that that's the way to look at it is, hey, it's another tool in the toolbox that you can choose to use when the situation dictates that it's the right choice. And obviously, you got to look at security, you got to look at resiliency, you got to look at, data transfer, you got to look at, hey, can my network handle it? Right? There's lots of stuff that goes along with that information, but we're going to give you the option to now have that decision process, while in the past, it wasn't an option. All right, well, thank you all for coming. I'll be here for a few minutes if you have any follow-up questions.